Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about the small intestine. And before we talk about the small intestine, we have to check on something. That's the stages of digestion. For this food to reach the small intestine, it has to undergo certain stages. And this is a complete stage of digestion that you see in front of your screen right now. The first stage we have the ingestion, then we have the digestion, then we have absorption, then we end it with the elimination. Just from ingestion, we know that that's taking in of food. Then digestion, this is the breakdown of food by by mechanical and chemical processes into molecules small enough for cells to absorb. Then we have the next stage, that's the absorption. This is the transportation of products of the digestion from the digestive system into the circulatory system, which distributes them to the rest of the body. And we're going to find that the small intestine, that's our topic of today, is going to be of very importance here in the absorption part. And we also have the last stage, that's the elimination, that's the removal of undigested solid waste from the body. So let's start. We're going to talk, as I said, we're going to measure on the absorption today. So we find that glucose and other simple sugars, amino acids, and some fat soluble substances are minimally absorbed. We find that the rate of emptying of the stomach depends upon the physical and chemical composition of the meal. So here, if we compare fluid empty, we find that fluids empty more rapidly than solid. Let's say someone has taken a fluid meal and someone has taken a solid meal, the fluid will be absorbed fast more than the solid. Then we find that carbohydrates also more rapid than the protein. If someone takes carbohydrates and another person takes a protein meal, we find that the carbohydrate will be absorbed fast than the protein. And then we find that the protein more rapid than the fat. So we find the fat is the what is the least absorbed. If we compare the absorption rate, we find that the fat is the least. So we've also found that when food particles are sufficiently reduced in size and are nearly soluble, the duodenal bulb and the second part of the duodenum relaxes, allowing the emptying of the stomach to start. Here is what I mean by the duodenal bulb. Here's the duodenal bulb, then this is the superior part of the duodenum, then the descending part of the duodenum, then here's the horizontal part. So here we find that after this food has been broken down very well in the stomach, it's allowed to pass through the duodenal bulb. We find that the food particles are sufficiently reduced in size and nearly soluble. The duodenal bulb and the second part of the duodenum relaxes. So these two parts, the duodenal bulb and the second part of the duodenum, they relax to allow this. We find that the second part and the duodenal bulb, they relax, allowing the emptying of the food from the stomach. So here is the small intestine, and these are the parts of the small intestine. We have the duodenum, that's the uppermost part. We have the jejunum, that's the middle part, and we have the ileum, that's the lower part. Then the primary function of the small intestine are mixing and transportation of intraluminal content, production of enzymes, and here absorption of the nutrients. So we find that what are the some of the things we need to know about the small intestine. We find that what is the length of the small intestine? We find that it's 670 to 70 centimeters to 760 centimeters in length. That's the length of the small intestine. It's very long. Then, if we check the diameters, we find that it's 3 to 4 centimeters. That's the diameter. And this is the longest part of the digestive tract. That's a very good question. They usually like asking it. Which one is the longest part of the digestive tract? You should not miss that because I have talked about that right here. And we find that it's the small intestine with a length of 670 centimeters to 760 centimeters. So we find that it begins at the pylorus. That's the here. It begins here. Here is where we have the pyloric sphincter, and the pylorus is right here. Let me show you a more clear image that you'll be able to relate. So we find that the pylorus is somewhere here. Here's our it begins somewhere there, and we find that it begins at the pylorus, the juncture with the stomach. That's where the stomach ends, and end at the ileocecal valve, the juncture with the colon. And let me show you the ileocecal valve. It's somewhere here. Let me show you a more clear picture so that you can be able to relate. No, not this one. Let me go. Let me strike the ileocecal valve. No, not there, but I think I failed to add it in my slide. But here's where it begins. It begins right here when this where the stomach ends. We have the where the pyloric sphincter is. That's the we have the pylorus. Then it ends at the ileocecal valve. That's the valve. It ends at the ileocecal valve. That's the valve that's between the small intestine and the large intestine. So we also find that the main functional segments of the small intestine, we have the duodenum. That's the uppermost functional segment of the small intestine. Then we have the jejunum. Then we have the ileum. That's the lowest part of the small intestine. And basically, here's what I'm talking about. Here's the cecum. Here's the ileocecal valve that I was talking about. It's here in between. We find the here's the large intestine and here's the small intestine. This is where the small intestine ends at the ileocecal valve, and it starts at the we say it starts at the pylorus here, right here. So all this right here is the small intestine. So we also find the first segment is known as the duodenal bulb. That's the first segment of the duodenum. It is the widest part of the small intestine, and the second part of the duodenum runs vertically in, downward in front of the hilum of the right kidney. It is onto this part through the duodenal papilla. That's the papilla of water. We find that the pancreatic juice and bile flows, and we also find that the third part of the duodenum runs horizontally to the left into the we find that the third part of the duodenum runs horizontally to the left in front of the outer and inferior vena cava. I'll be able to show you what I'm talking about, those parts of the duodenum. Let's just finish with this first. Then we find that the fourth part of the ascends to the left side of the second lumbar vertebra, then bends sharply downwards and forwards to join the second part of the small intestine. So here's what I was talking about, all those yelling I was doing right there. So this is the duodenum. Here's the descending part. You can see here in this diagram here. Then we have the transverse part. Here's the transverse part. Then we have the ascending part. So this is the ascending part of the duodenum. Yep. Then here's the ileum, the the downer part. That's the ileum. Then what else? What else do you need to see in this picture, in this diagram of ours? I think that's all that I was saying. We find that the fourth part ascends to the left side of the second lumbar vertebra, then bends sharply downwards and forwards to join the second part of the small intestine. So we are going to find that the duodenum forms part of the forms two-fifths of the rest of the small intestine and has numerous convolutions and is attached to the posterior abdominal wall by the mesentery, an extensive fold of serous secreting membrane. We find that the ileum is the remaining three-fifths of the small intestine. Though there is no absolute, we can't tell that this were through. We find that though there is no absolute point at which the jejunum and the the jejunum ends and the ileum begins. You can't tell that this is where the jejunum ends and this is where the ileum begins. So we also find, after talking all about all that, let's take on the blood and nerve supply of the small intestine, and we find that the superior mesenteric artery, That's a branch of the abdominal aorta, and the superior pancreatic duodenal artery, a branch of the hepatic artery, supplies the small intestine with the blood. Here's what I'm talking about. Here is the superior mesenteric artery, and here is the pancreatic, pancreatic duodenal. Here's what I'm talking about. This is the blood supply of the small intestine, and you can see very well how it supplies the small intestine. Yeah. Then we also find that the blood from the intestine returns by a means of superior mesenteric vein, which is which with the splenic vein forms a portal vein which drains into the liver. That's the venous return from the small intestine. Then we also find that the small intestine, that now we are going to take up the nerve supply of the small intestine, and we find that the small intestine has both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic innervation. The vagus nerve provides the parasympathetic innervation, then sympathetic innervation is provided by the branch of the superior mesenteric plexus, a nerve network underneath the solar plexus. And what's this solar plexus we are talking about? A solar plexus is a connection of two bundles of nerves that intertwine and pass each other at a center of at a central location in the abdomen. So we find that sympathetic innervation is provided by the branches from the superior mesenteric plexus, nerve network underneath the solar plexus that follows the blood vessels into the small intestine and finally terminates at the ovic plexus, which is located between the circular and the longitudinal muscles of the Meissner plexus, which is located in the submucosa. Then we find that the mesenteric plexus the mesenteric plexus, the plexus of Hochberg, lies in the muscularis layer of the alimentary canal and is responsible for motility, especially the rhythm that forces the contraction of the muscularis. We also find that the submucosal plexus, also known as the plexus of Meissner, lies in the submucosal layer and is responsible for regulating digestive secretions and reacting to the presence of the food. So that's all we have for today's presentation about the small intestine. And if you found it to be helpful, make sure you don't forget to like and subscribe. In my next presentation, it will be also about the small intestine, and make sure it will be about the contractions of the small intestine, how the food penetrates in the small intestine. Make sure you don't miss that. So, thanks for watching my video, and let's meet in my next video